Hi, I'm Beth, and this video is brought to you by Babylock. Triangle squares are a common unit in quilting, but they can be tricky to get just right. Today I'm going to share 6 tips for getting perfect triangle squares. Our first tip is to make your initial squares 1/8 of an inch larger than your pattern calls for. Then sew them together, and then you can trim them up to the finished size. So these are 2-inch finished. Then you can line up your 45-degree line on your ruler with the center line of your triangle square, and then trim it on the 2 sides here. Then turn it around and do the same thing. And this will ensure that you get a perfect triangle square with that line going right down the center. It does take a little extra time, but we really feel like the precision is worth it. Our second tip is to use a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. So the distance that you're sewing away from your marked line should just be a tiny bit smaller than 1/4 inch. This scant 1/4 inch seam allowance will give you the few extra threads you need to get precise triangle squares. We recommend you still check the size and, if necessary, square up the block. If you're having trouble with your points getting eaten by your machine, you can switch out for a straight stitch plate. It has a smaller opening for the needle, so there's not as much room for that fabric to get pulled down into your machine. Our third tip is, if you're struggling with accuracy, instead of marking the diagonal line and sewing 1/4 inch away from it, go ahead and just mark 1/4 inch from the center and sew on the lines. Our next tip is pressing matters. Set the seams by pressing on top of the stitching lines. This helps the stitching sink into the fabric, so when you press the triangle square open, you have a clean, straight line diagonally through the square. To make it easier to join multiple triangle squares together, you'll want to cut off the dog ears. Now, if you are using the make the triangle squares larger method that we talked about as our first tip, then you already have done this. And finally, when you're sewing your triangle square units together, using a leader and ender strip to start with can help you get a nice start on your pieces, especially when you have a bunch of bulk right at the beginning of your triangle square units. So next time you're sewing triangle squares, give these tips a try.